I'm Dr. Sarah Olivo.
And I'm Dr. Liz Seidler, and you're listening to College is Fine, Everything's Fine.
Hi, Dr. Busch. We are so excited to have you today.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. So I am an adult child and adolescent psychiatrist, which means that I prescribe medications and also provide psychotherapy for people who have anxiety, depression, or just generally struggling and not quite sure why.
Gotcha. And a lot of people might not know the difference. I've figured that people are constantly calling me a psychiatrist. And I'm like, no, I'm a psychologist. They're like, well, what's that? And what's a social worker? So in short, psychiatrists prescribe the medications. Psychologists do the talk therapy as well as social workers and other kinds of therapists. And many psychiatrists also do therapy, but you guys are the ones who know the most of the information out there and then prescribing the medication.
Right. And I usually also say, one thing that's distinguishing is that we've been to medical school. So I've done surgeries and delivered babies and done all of these kinds of things, but have decided to focus specifically on the mind-body connection.
Right. But you've seen inside a body and I have not.
Yes.
And
exactly.
And you call yourself the college psychiatrist. Is that right? Do I have that correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I love working with college students. That's my main focus. And, one of the reasons why I like to do this is because, one, it's just a lot of fun as adolescents are becoming adults, but also my own experience in college. I had struggles. I really struggled. I came from a public school in Albuquerque, New Mexico to the University of Chicago, which is a huge. And I went to get help at student counseling and they said, "Oh, you're depressed." And I was like, okay, and sad, but, you know, and that totally turned me off. And I didn't find out until later that I really had my own different learning challenges. And so I wish I would have known that in college. And so what I am hoping to do is really provide a more nuanced assessment and treatment planning for college students. That's okay, maybe you have these mental health things going on, but what else is going on? What is underlying?
Yeah. Versus just smacking a big depressed label right on top of a much more complicated story. That's so nice.
We are really excited to have you here today because it's the first time we're speaking with a psychiatrist. We got a lot of feedback about access to prescription medications that maybe were not prescribed to them, that a lot of college students are using on college campuses. And even if they are prescribed to them, I think there's a lot of misuse of prescribed medications. And so what we would broadly maybe call these are study drugs. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what are these types of medications? What would they typically be prescribed for?
Yeah. So study drugs are things that are typically in the psychostimulant category. It's a big word, but basically stimulants. That would be prescribed for ADHD. And so that would be things like Adderall, Vyvanse, Concerta, Ritalin, Focalin, those kinds of things. They act on the brain to help people focus is really the big gist of it. And so they're really effective. And here's the thing, of all the medicines that I prescribe, these are probably the most effective. I think 70% of the people that take these medications will notice a difference in how they're able to focus. Yeah. Just because you take them and see that difference doesn't mean that you necessarily have ADHD. So I will say that about this medication. So anyhow, these medications, they come in long-acting forms, they come in short-acting forms. And they are prescribed by either a psychiatrist or pediatrician or primary care doctor, and they're regulated. They have a special classification within the DEA's classification system. And so you have to have a special license to prescribe them, and they're also monitored in a different way. So these are the medications that people are often either prescribed and or using when they're not prescribed.
The way I think about it is, why someone with ADHD might need them is because the
Mm-hmm.
stimulant for them is really stimulating the part of their mind that struggles, right? The executive functioning piece that regulates
Right.
things like attention, body kind of hyperactivity, the part of their mind that where that those pieces are stored, right, is asleep sometimes. And the stimulant acts to wake that up, as opposed to somebody who doesn't have that. They don't need
Mm-hmm.
that to be woken up. It's already awake.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know
No,
the
I
difference.
love that. I love that. So not only awakening that part of the brain, but also like helping to organize and focus that part of the brain, because that's the other thing, right? That part of the brain really helps people organize themselves, put things together, and the stimulant you might also kind of think about as like the glue that kind of like puts it all together. So that people can do the things that they need to do. And you're right, people who have ADHD are sort of missing that. And the
Right.
medication helps them.
Well, actually, I learned this, of course, from a child psychiatrist that I worked closely with, I stole this from her, but she said that medication for ADHD, it's almost like the part of our brain that organizes things is the conductor, like of an orchestra. And so you might have
Hmm.
the wind section and the string section and the percussion section, and all those sections might play really beautifully, but the conductor falls asleep. And so they don't know sort of when to come in, if they're going to be quiet, loud, just stop altogether. And the conductor has fallen asleep. So the medicine helps sort of wake the conductor up so that he can help or she can help
Hmm.
like organize the different sections of the brain. Um, and I think to your point, when you said, it just reminded me, when you said it has to sort of organize and it's the glue of it. But right, everyone has these different beautiful parts of their brain, and we're trying to stimulate or wake up the conductor so they can describe and kind of help the different pieces work together and not against each
Hmm.
other. But if you don't
Absolutely.
have ADHD, your conductor's working just fine.
Yeah, your conductor's working just fine. And or, there are people who might be having some different
Right.
challenges.
Right.
So another way that ADHD is diagnosed, I can diagnose it as a psychiatrist, but there are also psychologists who can diagnose with other formalized testing, sort of that comes together in a report called a neuropsychological testing or neuropsychological report, right? And so in those, during that testing, you might find that you have a difference in the way that you read, or the way that you process math problems and those kinds of things. And so I think it's important, that people understand what other challenges they might have, because taking these study drugs may not actually help, right? Like if your conductor is awake, but the wind section is not playing the right music, it doesn't matter if you wake up the conductor, right? So, and that, wind section might be a learning, like a reading difference or how you're processing math or things like that.
Right. A memory issue, all sorts of things.
Dr. Busch, some things you said earlier, I do want to unpack a little bit. That
Yeah.
you alluded to the fact that these medications are regulated, meaning that there's something about the quality of the medication and how it
Mhm.
works that we really want to be mindful, like other drugs, I believe, but you can correct me, have a tendency to form a dependence or be abused or misused.
Right. So, stimulants are trained as work on the brain in the same ways that like cocaine does, essentially. And so, as we know, cocaine is a substance that is an illicit drug, right? And so, in the same way, stimulants can be habit forming. And so, this is a part of the reason why they are so regulated. Um, as our opiate, as our other things. Interestingly enough, other things that can be habit forming, like alcohol, tobacco, are heavily regulated, but conversation for another switch. So, anyhow, these things are regulated not only for their potential to form addiction, but also because they impact the body in ways that can be very dangerous. And so, when I'm prescribing these medicines, I'm doing a careful medical history. These medicines are not indicated for people that have a family history of sudden cardiac death. because they increase the heart rate, the blood pressure, and this can really predispose someone who has this in their family to death. That's a very serious thing. Um, so there's that. Also contraindicated for people who have a history of disordered eating or eating disorders, and that they can really make eating disorders worse. And eating disorders can also be life. So these medications have to be prescribed carefully to people who don't have these contraindications, because the implications are serious. Really can be a matter of life or death. I will also say, and this isn't, necessarily why they're so regulated, but is an important factor in considering who they're prescribed to. They can increase anxiety. And so one thing that I find is that sometimes folks are having problems with their academic studies because of anxiety. And the treatment is completely different. Stimulants can actually make anxiety worse. And they can increase the physiologic sensation of anxiety, heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate. And so this is another reason why they have to be prescribed thoughtfully and carefully. Somebody who knows what they're doing.
What are sort of the pros, but mostly cons of using these? And you said death. So that's, it's a pretty big one. So there you go. That's great. Are there reasons outside of, life-threatening reasons why you might say, and again, you already mentioned things like if it's anxiety, it's not really helping, but any other potential reasons why these probably shouldn't be your first go if they're not prescribed to you?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One, common side effects of these medications can lower appetite. So if there's someone who is already struggling with maintaining a healthy weight, whether they have diagnosed anorexia or not, maybe they're just underweight, this can be a challenging medication. Not a total contraindication, but it's a thought when we're prescribing it. If they're already having difficulty with sleep, these medications can interfere with sleep. And so you would sort of adjust the time of day that you take them, but also sort of being attentive to if this is impacting your sleep.
I was going to say, you said that these medications work really similar to cocaine would, right? And if I were to survey college students and if I were to say, you're having a hard time studying, you need to kind of focus and stay awake, would you do cocaine versus take an Adderall from your friend?
Ooh.
I think most people would tell me that they've probably already taken the Adderall from their friends versus the cocaine. So what are your thoughts, Dr. Busch, about why college students might be more agreeable to taking a friend's prescription or potentially even getting a prescription, even though it's not warranted, even though you're saying it's well-regulated?
I mean, it seems safer, right? It's prescribed by a doctor. You're not getting it from X dealer on the street where it might be laced with X, Y, or Z, right? They see it as a safer option than getting something that's not prescribed by a doctor. I think that's the biggest reason. And again, it probably works, right? 70% of people respond to it. They might say, "Oh yeah, this really works." Now, it's actually interesting. In the literature, we see that in the long run, there is no correlation with taking stimulants that are prescribed for someone else with higher academic achievement. I think is really interesting, right? Because the minds of a lot of college students, and listen, I'll say even non-college students, I have parents who come to me and say, "Oh, I took my child's Adderall. I think I might have ADHD." Anyway, in the minds of them, they think, "Oh, if I take this, I'm going to be better at X, Y, or Z. I'm going to be more successful." And so it's kind of interesting to see in the literature that's not always the case. So yeah, to answer your question, I think that people are taking them because they think it's safer than getting something from the street. And that's, there's just a lot of need to achieve and have good academic performance, to get ready for internships, or to be competitive for internships, and then to be competitive for jobs or graduate school. So I just want to acknowledge, there's a lot of pressure to perform and to perform at a high level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've talked a lot about how in these situations we can give a ton of advice, but we also recognize the environment's really powerful and it might be worth trying to look at other ways to combat that necessarily, but to pay attention to that piece of it. I know we're talking a lot about people who aren't prescribed these medicines and take them, maybe are friends or from in some other way, but there's ways to abuse it even if it's prescribed to you. So what about people who
Absolutely.
decide, let me just snort it? What do you
Yeah.
say to them?
I say, it's not good for your nasal cavity. That's like
You like
one
your
of those
nostrils, yes?
very practical things. And I mean, listen, when I'm working with my students, I do have a harm reduction approach. So there are some folks that think just thinking about substance misuse in general, that abstinence is the best policy, but I really try to keep an open door so you can have a conversation. I can talk to you about, okay, well, what is it doing to your body? And so for folks who are using cocaine, I'm like, okay, well, let's think about reducing your use. What can we do to protect your body and those kinds of things? So one, I would say, okay, let's think about what this is doing to your body. How can we reduce your use to do it more safely? So that's one thing. And the reason why people do it is because it gets into the bloodstream faster than if you take it orally. Maybe that's not obvious, but that is why people will snort as opposed to taking it orally. Um, and so, this is one thing I should bring up. If people are abusing, this means that they're probably taking it as it's not prescribed. Prescribing it up, snorting it, taking it more frequently. I might have someone who comes, oh, I'm out of my prescription, I need more, or sometimes I lost it, or these kinds of things. And so either they're giving it to friends or they're using it more frequently. So if maybe it's prescribed to take once a day, maybe they're taking it twice a day. Maybe they're taking it 3 times a day. And so, and that could be for a number of reasons. Either they're feeling like they've left it on top of their sinus, or they like the way that it makes them feel awake, or whatever it may be.
I see a lot of college students misusing their medication in the sense of feeling like it's an advantage that they can stay up later, right? Back to that achievement piece. I think they're very attached to, they might need it, just in terms of what their brain chemistry looks like, but then they're running out of the medication, like you said, they're misusing it. They're using it as a way that in the long term causes more impairment, right? They're not sleeping, et cetera.
And the thing so again, I provide a lot of psychoeducation, and I'm sure you guys know this, like your brain needs time to consolidate the information that it learns, and that happens during sleep. So it's actually working against yourself if you're not sleeping at night. And so that's one thing that I talk about. Okay. And thinking about other things that we can do so that you're alert for a longer time, or, like maybe we start with exercise in the morning, and that's really a natural way of treating ADHD. And then you take your stimulant, at whatever time, and you're just sort of having a longer duration for the day where you're attentive and can focus on things. So I do a lot of, behavioral modifications. Okay, if you're more awake in the morning, let's try to get the bulk of your studying done in the morning, or, you guys probably do all of these things. But that is one of the things that I talk about is like your brain just needs time to get all that information in and make sense of it. It happens when you're asleep. So we want to make sure you're getting good sleep.
Yeah, I think about when you have sort of a sinking ship because of a lot of different holes, right? Lack of sleep, powerful environment. Maybe you think that the taking medicine is going to plug a hole, but it really just does that. It plugs the hole, but the water's coming in terms of the fact that you're not able to consolidate your sleep, or maybe you're technically finishing reading a book, but you have not absorbed it because your mind is working too quickly and not in the way it's used to. And we also know that learning is state dependent. So if you are learning while high, if you're learning while activated on a stimulant, you're probably going to need to really be high for the test to access the information in the same way. So our brains don't really work the way that we sometimes want them to from that perspective. And yeah, sleeping, eating, these are some of the foundations and pillars of a happy mood or a kind of a regulated mood. So if you're anxious and you're taking these things, but then now you're not sleeping or eating effectively, I mean, it just starts to become a snowball effect, really. But I do think that I've had people who are prescribed these things because they do have ADHD. They really need them to regulate. They'll take 2 because they have a big paper, and then suddenly they don't have enough at the end of the month. And the doctor is not going to prescribe them more because they're aware, hey, we know that you double up. We can't, it's regulated. We can't just keep on allowing this to happen. And so it's a real risk to take more than prescribed or to give them to your friends, especially for somebody who does need them to do
Mhm.
the work.
And I would say, this can be important to have a good relationship with the person
Mm.
who's prescribing your medicine, right? Because if someone comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm feeling like my medication is wearing off by 3 o'clock, but I really need to be able to study and time," we can talk about how do we change the dosing so that you really are covered for the times that you need to be covered. So I think that a good conversation can be had with your doctor about how can you make the adjustments that you need so that you're not running out, you're still having a reasonable dose and that kind of thing.
All right. So let's say you have to go into your doctor and fess up, right? What's
Hmm.
something they might be able to say, and how could you preview that conversation for them? You said harm reduction before, but what would that look like in a back and forth with you?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I so it can go a number of ways, right? I really do encourage transparency. I can't really see a lot of people coming to me and say, "Hey, I've given this medicine out to my friend," like because I think that would be sort of a no go for continuing to prescribe, right? And I think that's reasonable for anyone to say, like, okay, that is a very kind of misuse of the medication, and it's safe to continue prescribing. If it's again, hey, I find that if I take my Adderall is 5 milligrams twice a day. And I find that if I take an extra one in the late afternoon, I can get a little bit more homework done. I think that's reasonable to say in that way to your doctor and say, is there anything that we can do to change my medications? Because I know that I'm running out early. And I think it is okay to be honest about that, right? Um, so that's what I would do is really say, hey, I'm finding that this medication is not helping them the way that it used to, or it's not lasting as long. I think that's a great way to start the conversation um, about it. And, different places have different policies. Sometimes doctors will have a contract that you have with them for controlled substances. And if you are running out of them early, that can be sort of a violation of the contract and potentially in the patient physician relationship. So there are some different considerations there, but I think, you know, if you're using more because you feel like you need it, you can approach them that way. I think also if you're finding that you're using it in a way that you can't control, that's also something you can talk about with your doctor. Because there are resources, there are things that we can think about doing to help you. So, say like, I find myself like just really wanting to use this and feeling like I need it and I can't stop. That's a different conversation to have. One that I also welcome, right? And to sort of extend beyond study drugs. When people are using other drugs, I say, well, what does it do for you? How is it helping you?
Mhm.
And see if we can come up with a safer way for you to get help. Is there an alternative that I can prescribe or something like that? Um, so I guess the best policy would be to be honest and sort of say what's going on for you. I think that we as doctors might have more to help than you know.
I'm pausing just so I don't make sure I interrupt Liz.
No, I was just going to say quickly. I know there's a lot of barriers to college students finding psychiatric care, but everything you're saying, I see a lot of college students undervalue their relationship and communication with their psychiatrist or whoever's prescribing their medicine. And they're like, well, I have you. You're my psychologist. Like, I love you and I like talking to you. But I'm like, I'm not, it's really important. How important it is to
Yeah.
feel comfortable talking about your symptoms, talking about if you're struggling with the medicine you're on or other drugs that you're taking. And as you were talking, Dr. Busch, I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to refer some of my patients to you. But I think I know not everyone has the luxury to being able
Mhm.
to shop around for different
Mhm.
psychiatric providers. But I love the language that you just gave for them to hopefully have a script that if they're in a position where they feel like they're struggling to come up with the words to talk about what they're going through, that they heard it here.
And one other thing I would say, because you're right, not everyone has the luxury to shop around. I have the luxury of time because of the way that I've structured my practice. So my follow-up visits are at least 30 minutes and sometimes longer. Not everyone practices in that way or can practice in that way. There are a lot of pressures. So another thing I would say, if you're finding that you need to have a longer conversation, is to maybe say that for your follow-up appointment. I know a lot of follow-up appointments for ADHD management can be 15 minutes. And sometimes can get even shorter than that, 5 or 10 in practice. And so you might say to the person prescribing your medicine, hey, I have some questions. Can we have more time? I don't know.
That's great.
Can this be a 30-minute visit instead of a 15-minute visit?
It's a nice, easy way to advocate for yourself. And I also, basically, what I heard you saying is that no one's going to get in trouble by telling you the truth. And at best, we'll be able to get some really feasible help from you by telling them the truth. I try to tell people all the time, like, there's one thing you're going to tell me that's going to be shocking by any stretch. I've heard it before. And if I haven't heard it before, I'm still in a place of trying to help you. That's still the goal always. And I like that idea that you're going to be looking at what is part of the picture. And so from that perspective, to zoom out, if someone is abusing stimulants, whether they are prescribed or not, that's probably a sign that they're feeling maybe overwhelmed or that they don't have another skill set to put in place or a community or college that's supporting them. I mean, I think we can start to look at if this is happening, whether you continue or not, because I can't control that. At the very least, we can start to figure out, why is this feeling like your only option?
I would just say, because a lot of the times people don't know when they have a problem because a lot of people around them might also, like, it might be normalized, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to say, here are a couple of questions that you could ask yourself to determine if you're using in a way that could potentially not be healthy for you, right? And this would be kind of wondering, am I using too much? So 4 questions. You've tried to cut back and you can't. Others have found a problem with how you use or have been critical. Man, you're doing that again. Like, you feel guilty about how you're using, and you feel like you need to use a steady drug or something just sort of in the first thing in the morning to get up or to combat feeling hungover, or like you just don't feel normal unless you use it. So those are kind of 4 questions. And if you answer yes to any of those, it's probably worth talking about with the person who's prescribing the medicine or finding some resources on campus for help, which I can give you guys that you can either put in the show notes or stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I also think it's really important to think about, yes, because you said it's normalized, and there are some places where it's normalized, there's some groups where it's normalized. And so sometimes you also want to make sure that you're peeking, and not to compare yourself necessarily, but just to peek out if any of those answers are yes, but you're finding you're saying, but my friends do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes we find people who help us feel better about current bad decisions or unhealthy decisions, but you might start to pay attention to, is that actually helping me in the goal of using this less? Not to say stop being friends with it, but maybe not to, but to be able to use yourself as the barometer and not just the people in your immediate group.
Right.
Absolutely.
All right. Dr. Busch, if people are going to try to find you, where would they go?
So you can find me at collegepsychiatrist.com and also on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn. But Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at College Psychiatrist. So you can go to any of those places to find more information. And if you'd like to book an initial 15-minute consultation, I'm licensed in Illinois, Texas, Massachusetts, and New York. You can go to my website and there's an easy link to book a free 15-minute consultation.
All right. Easy. We already follow you, so highly recommend for other people to do it. And thanks again for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you to our guests for sharing their stories and their advice. This podcast is for college students, and we want input by college students, so please reach out by text, email, or voice memo to collegesfinepodcast@gmail.com or 929-500-2231. Tell us your story, give us tips on topics you'd like to hear, or give us feedback about an episode.
Follow us on TikTok and Instagram at College is Fine Podcast for episode announcements and resources. And last but not least, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the podcast. Every hit of that plus button helps us keep going.